My ex-husband's new wife filed a lawsuit saying I was harassing their family. In court, she said, she won't leave us alone. I quietly played audio of her calling me repeatedly and leaving threatening messages. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down. I never thought I'd be standing in a courtroom with my ex-husband again, but there I was. Only this time, it wasn't a divorce hearing. It wasn't about custody or money. It was because his new wife, Megan, had sued me for harassment. She sat there at the plaintiff's table, looking smug, acting like she had already won. Her lawyer stood up, straightened his tie, and got right to it. Your Honor, my client has been subjected to months of harassment, stalking, and distress at the hands of her husband's ex-wife. He gestured toward me without even looking in my direction. This woman refuses to leave them alone. She calls them repeatedly, follows them to events, and spreads false rumors about my client. She's been warned, and yet she continues this obsessive, toxic behavior. We're requesting an immediate restraining order. Megan sniffled for effect and dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she probably brought just for the occasion. I didn't react. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap. Because I knew something they didn't. My ex-husband, Dave, and I were married for almost 12 years. We had 2 kids, a home, and what I thought was a solid life. Until I found out about Megan. She was a woman he worked with. I don't know when it started, but by the time I found out, they were already in deep. I handled the divorce quietly. I wasn't going to beg a man to stay who had already left. Texas is a fault divorce state, and I had enough proof of his affair to walk away with everything I wanted. Dave moved in with Megan before our divorce papers were even finalized. At first, I thought she was just another woman who had convinced herself she won some kind of prize. I had no reason to care about her. But she had every reason to care about me. It started with petty little things. She'd send me fake accidental texts. Oops. Thought I was texting Dave. Just wanted to remind him how amazing it is waking up next to him every morning. Your kids just love me. I think they might start calling me Mom soon. Haha. I ignored her. Every single time. Then she started showing up at my kids' soccer games. She made sure I saw her wearing shirts that said things like, "World's Best Bonus Mom." I still ignored her. Then came the phone calls. At first, it was just hang-ups. Then voicemails. Then the real messages started. You better stop bad-mouthing me to your kids. You're pathetic. Just move on already. You think you're so smart, but I always win. Over and over, 4 months. Still, I did nothing. I didn't have the time or energy to fight with a woman who wasn't even supposed to be in my life. And that must have driven her insane. Because one day, I got a letter from a lawyer. Megan had filed a harassment lawsuit against me. According to her, I had been stalking her, following her, calling her at all hours of the night, and spreading horrible rumors to the entire community. She claimed I was trying to ruin her life, because I couldn't handle that my ex had moved on. And the worst part? She wasn't just asking for a restraining order against her and Dave. She wanted the order to include my children. If the judge approved it, I wouldn't be allowed within 500 feet of them when they were at their dad's house. This wasn't about her feeling unsafe. This was about trying to get rid of me. I knew exactly what this was. If she could paint me as some kind of crazy, unstable, jealous ex, she could start pushing for full custody. I'd seen women like her before. She had already stolen my husband. Now she wanted my kids, too. And I decided, right then and there, that if she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom feeling nothing but calm determination. Megan, on the other hand, looked ready for a party. Tight red dress, stilettos, dramatic makeup. I don't know if she thought she was going to flirt her way through a legal proceeding, but she was in for a rude awakening. Her lawyer went first. She was a victim. I was a bully. She just won't leave us alone, Your Honor, Megan fake cried. We've blocked her, ignored her, done everything we can, but she keeps calling, showing up, and spreading lies. She dabbed at her eyes again, but there were no actual tears. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence to the court. The judge gestured for me to continue. I pulled out my phone, pressed a button, and suddenly, the courtroom was filled with Megan's own voice. You better stop talking bad about me to your kids. I'm going to make sure your life is miserable. You think you're so smart, but I always win. Her own words echoed through the silent courtroom. Megan's face went ghost white. Her lawyer jumped up immediately. Objection. Your Honor, this the judge raised a hand to silence him. Overruled. Let it play. I glanced at Megan. Her hands were clenched into fists, her jaw tight. She hadn't expected this. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my folder and pulled out printed logs of every call she had made to me. I handed them to the judge. He flipped through the pages. Then he turned to Megan. You claim the defendant was calling you repeatedly, he said, his voice neutral. But these records show over 50 calls from your number to hers. He looked up. Can you explain that? Megan froze. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing came out. The judge waited. She had no answer. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. Megan glanced at Dave. He was looking straight ahead, not saying a word. Because even he knew she was caught. I took a deep breath. I wasn't finished yet. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'd also like to countersue for defamation and emotional distress. Megan's lawyer immediately asked for a recess. And I knew then, I had already won. Megan and her lawyer disappeared into a conference room the moment the judge granted them a recess. I sat back down, feeling calm, but I wasn't stupid. I knew people like Megan. She wasn't going to walk away from this quietly. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was furious. And furious people make stupid mistakes. Dave stayed in his seat at the plaintiff's table, staring at the floor like a man who regretted every decision he'd made in the last 3 years. I ignored him. Instead, I focused on my own lawyer, Mark. He leaned in, voice low. She's in trouble, and she knows it, he said. Her best move would be to drop the case and run, but I don't think she will. I nodded. She's the type to double down. Mark sighed. Then let's be ready. After 20 minutes, Megan and her lawyer came back. Her eyes were red. Real tears this time. She looked like she had been yelling. Dave followed them in, looking even more miserable than before. The judge settled in his chair. Counselor, he addressed Megan's lawyer, have you and your client reached a decision? Her lawyer stood up, clearing his throat. Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed with our claims, he said. I had to bite back a laugh. She was really going to die on this hill. Mark stood up, adjusting his tie. Then we'd like to move forward with our counterclaims. The judge nodded. Very well. Let's continue. Megan went back to the stand. Now that her first plan had exploded in her face, she was shifting gears. She wasn't the frightened victim anymore. Now, she was the loving stepmother being attacked by a bitter ex-wife. I never wanted this, she said, her voice trembling. I just wanted to build a happy family with Dave and the kids, but she refuses to let us. She sniffled. She's poisoned them against me. She tells them I'm a homewrecker. She makes them feel guilty for liking me. I kept my face blank. The truth? My kids hated her on their own. She tried to force herself into their lives too fast, acted like their mom before she had even earned their respect, and then got mad when they pushed back. I never had to say a word. The judge sighed. Do you have any evidence of the defendant telling the children anything negative about you? Megan hesitated. Then, she turned to Dave. And that's when things got interesting. Dave looked up, startled. It was clear they hadn't planned this part. Megan's lawyer frowned but quickly asked, Mr. Dave's last name, can you confirm that your ex-wife has spoken badly about my client to your children? Dave froze. I watched it happen. This was the moment of truth. If he lied for Megan, he'd be caught in my crossfire later. If he told the truth, he'd be throwing his wife under the bus. His face twisted as he thought through his options. Then he took a breath and said the last thing Megan expected. No. Megan's head snapped toward him. What? Dave swallowed. She's never said anything bad about you. Not in front of the kids. Megan lost it. Are you kidding me, Dave? You know what she's done. She's ruining our family. The courtroom went dead silent. Even her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge rubbed his temple. Mrs. Megan's last name, control yourself. She was breathing hard, hands shaking. But she wasn't done. Not yet. I had a feeling Megan wasn't the type to walk away with her pride intact. She had humiliated herself, but she wasn't going to let it end there. No. She was going to make it worse. The second the judge called for another recess, Megan stormed out of the courtroom. I didn't follow. But I didn't have to. Because she came right to me. Right there in the courthouse hallway, with security guards standing just a few feet away, she got in my face. "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with." Mark immediately stepped between us. "Back off," he warned. She ignored him, eyes locked on me. "I'm going to take your kids," she whispered. "One way or another. You won't see them again." And that was the moment she made her biggest mistake yet. Because Megan? She forgot I was still recording. Megan had just threatened me in the courthouse hallway. She wasn't whispering anymore. Her voice was sharp, furious. "I'm going to take your kids," she spat. "One way or another. You won't see them again." And she had no idea I was recording every word. Mark, my lawyer, immediately pulled me back. "We're not doing this here," he warned. "Let's go." I didn't move. Because Megan wasn't done. She was breathing hard, her hands curled into fists. I could tell she wanted me to react. She wanted me to lose my temper, to say something that could be used against me later. So, I did the worst thing I could possibly do to her in that moment. I smiled. Her face twisted with rage. That's when one of the courthouse security guards stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to step back," he said firmly. She snapped her head toward him, eyes wide like she just realized people were watching. "I wasn't doing anything," she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "We were just talking." The guard didn't buy it. "Go back inside," he ordered. "Now." Megan huffed, but she stomped away. I turned to Mark. "We're using that," I said. He gave a slow nod. "Absolutely." As we walked back toward the courtroom, I caught something in my peripheral vision. Dave. He was standing near the entrance, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the floor like he was trying to disappear into it. I should have kept walking. I should have ignored him. But then he looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from losing a court case. Something else. I stopped. "What?" He hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "She's not going to stop." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I folded my arms. "You mean the lawsuit?" Dave shook his head. "No," he muttered. "Worse." I stared at him, waiting. For years, Dave had stood by Megan, let her torment me, let her play these games. But now? Now, he looked like a man who had finally realized what he'd married. "I didn't know she was going to do this," he said quietly. "I swear." I raised an eyebrow. "Which part? The fake lawsuit? The restraining order request? The threats?" He flinched. "All of it." I wanted to tell him to shut up and deal with his own mess. I wanted to walk away. But then he said something that stopped me cold. "She's been looking into lawyers. Custody lawyers. Not for me. For herself." I froze. Dave took a deep breath. "She told me that if she could get you labeled as a danger to the kids, she could file for guardianship." I felt a cold chill run through me. "She wouldn't win," I said slowly. "She's not their parent." Dave hesitated. "No. But she thinks she can make the right people believe you're unfit. And if she does that," my heart pounded. That's when I realized. Megan wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to replace me. When we returned, the judge didn't look pleased. "We've wasted enough time," he said. "Let's finish this." I stood up first. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I'd like to submit another piece of evidence." Mark handed me my phone. I pressed play. Megan's voice filled the silent courtroom. "I'm going to take your kids. One way or another. You won't see them again." A collective inhale swept through the room. The judge's eyes snapped to Megan. Megan's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, that audio," the judge held up a hand. "Be quiet." Megan sat there, face pale, mouth open like she couldn't believe what she just heard. Dave rubbed his face with both hands. I watched as reality finally caught up to her. She knew. She was done. But I wasn't finished yet. Because Megan had spent months trying to ruin my life. And now? I was going to end hers. The courtroom was dead silent. Megan's voice had just echoed through the room, her own words, caught on my phone. "I'm going to take your kids. One way or another. You won't see them again." No one moved. No one breathed. The judge's face was unreadable, but I saw the way his fingers tightened against the desk. Megan's lawyer was frozen. I could practically hear his brain scrambling for a way out of this disaster. But Megan? She looked completely unhinged. At first, she was pale, stunned, like she had just been hit in the face with a brick. Then, like a switch had flipped, she snapped. Megan shot up from her seat, knocking over a glass of water. It shattered on the floor. "That's not fair," she shrieked. She provoked me. I just watched her. Calm. Silent. Megan's lawyer tried to grab her arm, whispering something, but she ripped away from him. She turned on Dave. "You let this happen," she screamed. "You were supposed to back me up. You were supposed to say she was ruining our lives." Dave didn't even look at her. His entire body was slumped forward, hands gripping his hair. Megan wasn't done. "She is ruining our lives. You just sit there, doing nothing, like a weak, pathetic little, enough." The judge's voice boomed through the room. Megan snapped her mouth shut. The judge leaned forward. His eyes were sharp, unreadable. "Mrs. Megan's last name," he said, voice low but firm. "You are in a court of law. You do not speak unless you are addressed. Sit down." Megan did not sit down. Instead, she turned back to me. Her breathing was ragged, eyes burning with something beyond hatred. "You think you're better than me?" she spat. "You think you can just sit there, smiling like you've won?" I didn't answer. Because she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to herself. "This isn't over," she whispered. "You don't get to win." She turned to Dave. Her expression twisted into something ugly. "You don't get to win either." Dave finally lifted his head. And for the first time, I saw true fear in his eyes. Because Megan wasn't just lashing out anymore. She was planning her next move. The judge sighed. He was done. "Mrs. Megan's last name, you have just provided concrete evidence of harassment and malicious intent," he said, shaking his head. "Your case is dismissed." Then, he turned to me. "I find sufficient grounds for your counterclaim," he said. "Mrs. Your last name, you are granted a full restraining order against the plaintiff." Megan's breath hitched. The judge wasn't done. "You are also ordered to pay $10,000 in damages and legal fees." That did it. Megan screamed. "This isn't fair," she shrieked. "She set me up." She turned to Dave, wild-eyed. And then, it happened. The moment that ended everything. Megan took a shaking breath. Then, with a cruel, twisted smile, she whispered, "I should have just told her the truth about you." A chill ran down my spine. Dave stiffened. I saw his entire body go rigid. The color drained from his face. The whole room shifted. Like everyone could sense it. There was a secret. And Megan was about to say it. Dave spoke first. "Megan, don't." But that was all she needed. She smiled wider. "Oh, Dave," she said. "You think she'd still be sitting here so calm if she knew why you left her?" My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I had always believed that Dave had cheated because he was selfish. Because he wanted someone new. Because Megan had fed his ego. But the way he looked at her now. It was fear. Real fear. Megan tilted her head. "Tell her, Dave," she said sweetly. "Tell her why you really left. Tell her what you did." Silence. Then Dave exhaled. A long, broken sound. "And he told me." Dave's voice was quiet. But it hit like a bomb. "I didn't leave because of Megan," he said, eyes fixed on the table. "I left because I knew if I stayed, you'd find out about the money." "The money?" I frowned. "What money?" He swallowed. "The retirement account," he muttered. "The one you fought for in the divorce." My stomach dropped. "No. No way. I couldn't finish." My throat closed up. Dave nodded miserably. "I drained it," he whispered. "Before the divorce was final. Almost all of it." The room tilted. I felt sick. Everything, the lawyers, the documents, the months of fighting, had been for nothing. Because there was nothing left. And Megan? She was smiling. "Oh, I tried to stop him," she said in a fake sympathetic voice. "But, he was so sure he'd get away with it." She leaned in. Oops. I felt the rage start to build. Dave's shoulders slumped. I was going to pay it back, he mumbled. I didn't think you'd ever find out. Mark, my lawyer, was already flipping through his notes, his phone, something. His hands were moving fast. This is felony-level fraud, he murmured. This isn't over. Megan laughed. Oh, it's over, she said. Because he's broke. And now? She turned to Dave. You're going to be broke alone. Dave stared at her. What? Megan stood up. I'm done, she said, brushing imaginary dust off her dress. This was fun, but you lost. She grabbed her purse. Then, without another word, she walked out of the courtroom. Dave just sat there. His whole world had just imploded. And I wasn't even looking at him anymore. I was looking at Mark. What's the next step? I asked. Mark's answer was exactly what I needed to hear. We make him pay. Dave tried to apologize. Tried to explain. But I didn't care anymore. The court ruled in my favor. I got my restraining order. Megan disappeared. And Dave? He was about to lose everything.